Hey everybody, today's phrases are as mad as a hatter and movers and shakers. So let's start out with the Mad Hatter. Whenever we hear that, we think of Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, the book of course, and the Disney movie. And we know who the Mad Hatter is, right? And he was depicted in the movie as being a little nuts. But basically we use that phrase, if we use it at all, because it's kind of pretty old fashioned. I don't really hear it that much anymore. But basically it means that someone's just really pissed off, acting nuts, scooters, out there, maybe a little crazy, but just really flying off the handle. So that's what it means. But where did it come from, and what's the hat tie-in? So it turns out there is a literal tie-in to hat making specific to this phrase. Sometimes that's not always the case. You have a phrase and it's kind of some weird connection to something. But in this case, it's specifically tied to the hat making profession. I did not know this. The hat makers apparently used a lot of mercury in the making of hats back in the old days, 1700s, 1800s. Mercury is and has been proven to be an extremely toxic substance, right? I mean, they took it out of thermometers 30, 40 years ago because of that reason. People would touch it. We used it in high school. I remember we did a little lab experiment. You drop mercury because it's like a droplet, but it moves around like a solid kind of thing. Weird thing. So at any rate, it's very bad for you. And apparently the hat makers used to use it all the time in making their hats. I don't know what part of the hat or what it was about. Maybe it was the wire they put in the hats, was mercury. I have no idea. But at any rate, mercury poisoning, definitely a thing. It was then. Nobody knew about it. It is now. Everybody knows about it. But back then, the hat makers just kept making the hats with the mercury. And it is definitely known to penetrate the blood stream and cause wild mood swings, depression, all kinds of crazy health issues. Other stuff like antisocial behavior, aggressiveness, right? All things, if you add all those up, that can be definitely interpreted as somebody who's gone a little nuts, right? If you're acting that way, aggressive, antisocial, lashing out, mood swings, you're up, you're down, you're sideways, whatever. So definitely could be a problem, and certainly the tie-in is, I think, very logical to that. And that's what the research shows. Mad Hatter's disease is, in fact, what they call mercury poisoning even today. It's still referenced that. It's not the medical term for it, but it's the social term for it. Mad Hatter's disease equal mercury poisoning. So there you go. Where does it show up as a phrase? Well, it shows up, the earliest is in Edinburgh Magazine, 1829. That's the first time it kind of shows up in print, but it quickly appears a couple of times after that. Canadian author Thomas Halliburton had it in a book in 1835. And then it shows up again in another book from a guy in New Zealand around 1889. A second possible reference or tie-in comes from the mining industry, where a miner who worked by himself in a mine, of course they wore the hats there, is called a hatter. And when you work in solitude thousands of feet underground or hundreds of feet underground for a long time, I can see how that would make you a little crazy. And there's a possible tie-in there. I think the more common one and the one that's used and referenced the most is the mercury poisoning hat maker industry situation. But certainly the mining one is very plausible and may in fact be true as well. So as mad as a hatter, we know what it means. We kind of have an idea of when it popped on the scene. Is it okay to use today? If you want to sound like you're 85 years old, it's probably fine. There's nothing politically incorrect about it. It's just really old-fashioned. So knock yourself out. All right, so let's jump over to movers and shakers, okay? That phrase is very commonly used even today in 2020, so very popular still. And we know it to mean the people that have a very energetic demeanor, initiate change, influence events. We think about it a lot in the business world, entertainment world as well. So that's kind of how it's used today, and it is a common expression today. The phrase first appears in a poem 1874 was where it was actually used in print. At least that's where the researcher found it at the time. That phrase was then interwoven into a musical piece that was presented for the first time in public at the Birmingham Festival, October of 1912. Was the first time the phrase kind of made it out into the public, had you not read the poem some other time, which most people probably didn't because it was buried in there. So it kind of makes it on the public scene in 1912. But movers and shakers didn't really take off until the 20th century when the United States picked up on the phrase and has really pushed it forward ever since. A very famous and I guess infamous, I don't know, socialite named Mabel Dodge Luhan used it as the title of one of the volumes of her autobiography. Now, an autobiography we know is a biography of yourself, and for someone to have multiple volumes of that, I mean, and the fact that I've never heard of them, I don't know what that says about that person. They must have had a really big ego. But anyway, I would think one volume of an autobiography would be enough. This person had a couple, and the title was, in fact, Movers and Shakers. There's variants of it, flipping it around, shakers and movers. But that was the thing. So that's where it kind of really took off and became commonly used. Now, that was in 1934 where it appeared on the book cover, the title of the book. And again, kind of just floundered for another couple decades. But the 60s and 70s was really took off in the United States. Other countries eventually picked up on it as well. But it's definitely used commonly, even today. Not super commonly, but it's used. We know what it means now, and we got the origin of it, kind of. So is it okay to say today? Yeah, I mean, it's totally fine to say today. You can use it in a sentence even right now. Go down to the coffee shop, have a conversation about business or something. You can talk about movers and shakers, the people that are shaking up the industry, making things happen, right? Politics could be movers and shakers in politics too. So yeah, absolutely can be used today. So that is it for today. Mad as a Hatter, movers and shakers. Catch you next time.